Hello out there, and long time no see. I have not sat down to record anything in a little bit. I guess the last time that I did this, it was right after Halloween Horror Nights, so it's been a little while. But I am here today because after some decompressing time, making it through the busy holiday season, I am ready to talk yet again. Enjoyed taking some time to just be around family and all of that. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, all of that was really wonderful. Really busy, really hectic. Still made a point to keep consuming a lot of horror and horror content. And I'm here to talk about something kind of horror adjacent today. I think it's horror, in my opinion. Let's back up for a second. For those of you that don't know me, I am Carson. I am a huge fan of all things horror, horror books, horror movies, and Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios in Orlando. So we are in a brand new year here as I'm sitting down filming this. It is officially 2025, and last year I plowed through 58 books, which was more than I did the year previous, and a huge chunk of that was horror because that's kind of my vibe, that's kind of my little niche here. And towards the end of the year, I got another few horror books in there, some really good ones. There's so many that I just really want to talk about. So many horror things that I have so many thoughts about, but knowing me, sometimes my thoughts aren't really collected and I have to sit with something for a little while before it just comes out as a big rambling mess. For example, I actually really wanted to talk about a movie that just came out in the holiday season, Nosferatu, which I saw, but I'm still kind of deeply obsessed with that and anything that I would have to say about that movie, which I loved, adored, by the way, it would not have been coherent at all. So I decided to take a step back and look at something else, a book and a movie based off of a book that I was able to experience over the last year. Like I said, I read a lot of horror, and you can't really talk about horror books without addressing one of the most famous horror writers of all time, Stephen King. If you follow my Instagram, it's probably no secret that I do read a lot of Stephen King. He is one of my favorite authors. I would actually love to kind of sit down and delve some more into his works. I've only properly reviewed one of his books on my channel, and that was Salem's Lot, if you want to go check that out. I won't be speaking on the movie because the movie that came out this year was an absolute travesty. That's all I'll say about it. But I digress. I really do love his works, and I want to spend some more time just kind of doing a deeper dive on some of a certain series of books in particular, but that's one that I really will have to kind of get it together and more collect my thoughts about, because I'm a huge fan of his. His books really have gotten me through so much, so many hard things in my life. I was able to kind of put that aside just by reading his books and getting transported into a different world. And one thing about King is he can be pretty divisive in his works. One of the things that I actually really love to do, I lurk on that horror lit subreddit. I do not post on there, I just lurk and read a lot. I get a lot of recommendations for what to read off of there as well. But I love reading the threads about what's your favorite King? What's your least favorite King? And it's so funny to see how a book that some people just absolutely adore, other people really revile and really hate. So the Stephen King book that I'm going to be talking about today is kind of one of those that I think it's either a you love it or you hate it. Maybe you're kind of in the middle. Maybe there's some things about it that you like or that you don't like, but I've seen a lot of one extreme or the other for this book. I think it's really cool that so much of his works can be kind of divisive like that. And I know, there's some controversy. There's a lot of things that people say about King, but you know what? I'm a fan. Is he perfect? No, but I absolutely just love his work. So the King book that I want to talk about today is Gerald's Game. I would hold the book up and show it to you here, but I don't own a copy of it, tragically. I actually checked this one out from the library, but I really do want to get a copy of it. I would love to own this book. I'm going to say this right off the bat. This is an extremely difficult to sit through book. Just a blanket trigger warning for subject matter in this book. This book affected me so much that when I finished it, I felt like I kind of needed to go take a bath. It's that kind of just nasty, vile, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory way at all, but it just feels so disgusting in so many ways. But all that being said, as of right now, it is one of my favorite King books that I have ever read. And I've read a lot of King. I've read almost half of it. Like, he has so many books. The man is a machine, and I'm working my way. I want to read all of them eventually. And this was one that I was actually kind of hemming and hawing about a little bit, because I knew like the majority of what the book was about. I knew about the more famous plot points of this book. And by the way, this is not going to be a spoiler-free review. I'm not going to try to like go too much in detail, but this video will spoil some of the plots of the book / movie adaptation if you're not interested in hearing any of that. This, I would say, is one of my top 5 Kings that I've read so far at this point, and that was kind of a surprise to me because, like I said, I was putting it off. I didn't really want to read it because I was like, oh, I know it's going to be nasty. I don't want to read about it, but imagine my surprise when it turned out to be one of my favorite reads of 2024. So for you, those of you that do not know, this book, the least spoilery description that I can give of it is there's a married couple that goes up to their lake house during the off season to kind of spice up their relationship a bit. And things take a really bad turn, and the wife, Jessie, ends up handcuffed to the post of their bed, and her husband, Gerald, is dead on the floor, meaning that she is trapped and she cannot escape. This is a very psychological book. There's the horror of the situation with Jessie being stuck and unable to free herself from the handcuffs, but there's also this internal journey that she goes through as well. She's remembering figures from her past that she hasn't thought of or seen in a really long time, and they kind of act as her subconscious guide throughout this situation that she has found herself in, trapped in this house. And some things from her past that she's been trying to bury, she's been trying to avoid thinking about or talking about, are coming back up to the surface. And that's really where the true horror of this book lies. You know, it's one thing to be handcuffed and stuck in a remote location. Like I said, they are up there. It is the off season. There's no one around. She hears a man with a chainsaw in the distance, but there's not really a neighbor or anyone around to hear her screams or to come get her out of that situation. But it's that internal journey that is even scarier for me. Without getting too much into it, as she thinks back to some things that happened in her childhood, that's where I truly was the most disturbed by this book. And I think that's one of the things that made it either like a love or hate, because you are just kind of isolated with her and going on this mental journey with her and all of these things that are popping up. And I think the subject matter in parts of this book is just so off-putting and disturbing to people that it might make it kind of inaccessible and not something that people want to read. I'm not recommending this book to everybody. Like, I recommend that if you have any hesitations about it whatsoever, you should look at a synopsis before you pick it up, because I cannot overstate how disturbing some of the subject matter in this piece is. I would advise skipping ahead a little bit if you don't want to know the conclusion of Jessie's problem here. But the thing that I knew most heavily going into this book was how Jessie does in fact free herself from her handcuffs. I had heard the phrase degloving used to describe this book, and I knew going into it that that was going to be kind of the climax of the story, her being able to get out of the handcuffs by degloving herself, which is a very nasty, horrifying thing to even think about. I have to say that the reason I didn't really want to read about the degloving is because I'm a bit of a fainter. I have vasovagal syncope episodes really, really badly sometimes, and one of the biggest triggers of that for me is medical things like blood, and even just like seeing like someone with an IV. Like, I will faint if I see that like in real life. Now, I'm not like, ironically, I'm really into horror. Things like gore, that doesn't really disturb me because I know that's fake, that's over the top. But anything a little more real or more clinical and medical, that's where I kind of like dip out and can't really do all of that. Like when I go to get my blood drawn and have blood tests and everything, I have to tell them I need to lie down because I'm a bit of a fainter. It's just part of my life, you know, it's something I know to avoid certain triggers. So I knew that reading this book might not be the easiest thing for me, given what I just told you about what she has to do to her own body. And I'm not gonna lie, when I was reading her freeing herself, I did have to stop and do some in through the nose, out through the mouth breathing that I've been taught to do when I can feel one of my episodes coming on. Fortunately, like I know the warning signs and I can kind of get myself out of situations. Maybe one day I'll tell the story of the time I had to leave the Spanish Military Hospital Museum in St. Augustine, Florida, because I knew that it was happening. I was going down. Anyway, another story for another day. But I had to stop periodically while reading this book and just do some deep breathing because I'm like, this is too much. This is too much. I can't handle this. I'm gonna pass out. But even that, like I said, that wasn't even the worst part of it. My God, this woman's past, poor Jessie, as you delve more into her mind, it's just, she's been through so much. And I think that it's just harrowing to have to feel trapped right alongside her. And it really makes you think, like, what would you do in that situation? What lengths would you go to try to save yourself? Degloving aside, I do have to mention that this is the only book that has ever given me a jump scare while reading, which seemed kind of crazy, but I legitimately got jump scared in this book. And I don't want to spoil too much, but the first appearance of the Moonlight Man in this book actually caught me so off guard that I jumped while reading it. Now, that's one part of the book that I know a lot of people kind of take issue with, the Moonlight Man and the conclusion of that storyline. I don't really want to spoil that for anybody, but they kind of tack something on at the end there that just, it makes the horror just mount. Poor Jessie has been through enough. Has she not suffered enough? But I know that's one thing that a lot of people say was like a big negative for this book, was the inclusion of the Moonlight Man and what all of that actually was. I know I'm being kind of vague here, but I don't really want to spoil it for people that are interested in experiencing this book. So yeah, it's horrifying, it's nasty, it's traumatic, and I give it 10 out of 10. So if any of that intrigued you, I would say definitely check it out and go read it. I need to actually buy a physical copy. I support your local library, go check it out from the library, but certain books I like to own. So kind of part 2 of this review is about the movie adaptation that you can find on Netflix that I purposefully waited until after I had read the book to watch. The movie is directed by Mike Flanagan, and I freaking adore Mike Flanagan. I am obsessed with his work. I think he is a genius, and I feel kind of akin to him because he is such a huge fan of King in a way that I just love. Throughout the works that he's done that are King adaptations, you can tell that he just has so much love for the material, and I love when he throws in a reference to the bigger Stephen King universe at large that just gets me every single time. For example, in Gerald's Game, there was straight up a Dark Tower reference, and I am a huge Tower junkie. That's the series that I really want to do a deep dive into when I can actually like speak about it calmly. But he's a Tower junkie as well. He's a huge King reader. He's a constant reader just like me. And I just love that about him. It makes the work feel so much more accessible. And it's like, I feel seen. He just gets it. I know not everybody loves his stuff, but I just think he's a genius in the way that he can pack so much of an emotional punch into his projects, no matter whether or not, if it's horror or not. I think that there's this misconception with horror as a genre that it can't be touching, it can't be moving, it's just like schlock and gore. And you know, sometimes that's fine. Sometimes that's what you want in a horror piece, but I love the way that he can add so much nuance and emotion into his material. In fact, a video that I really want to make sometime, because we talk about it constantly, I would love for my husband and I to sit down and compare the rankings of all of the Flaniverse shows, because he and I have some differing opinions on that, and I think that would be really cool because I would love to like deep dive into all of that. So knowing that he was the director that did this movie, I was fairly confident that he would do a good job. And boy, did he ever. Were there some differences between the book and the movie? Yes. For example, they encounter the dog. Like, it actually shows them traveling up to the lake house at the beginning, Jessie and Gerald, and they encounter a dog that appears very heavily in the book early on. And my husband, who watched it with me, was like, oh God, something terrible is going to happen to that dog, isn't it? And I just tried to sit there and not say anything because I didn't want to spoil any of the book or the movie for him. And then after Gerald passes, instead of some of the figures from the book that appear to her, it's actually Gerald that she interacts with in her subconscious. And I thought that was a great choice. I mean, Bruce Greenwood, I need him to be in every Mike Flanagan production from now until the end of time. He's such a fantastic actor. And I don't even need to sit here and praise Carla Gugino because she is amazing too. She appears in a lot of his work. And I'm sorry, look, like, that's Mother. She's really doing the damn thing. I thought it was perfectly cast, as you can tell. And of course, a few other players, like his wife, Kate Siegel, appears. Henry Thomas appears. I was like, yay, when he showed up. And then I realized he was playing Jesse's dad. And I went, oh no. But overall, the plot of the movie remained largely untouched. And it was really cool to see some of those scenes that I could picture in my mind as I read it being portrayed on the screen, not that far off from the way that I had imagined it. Like some of it was actually kind of freaky to see, like, wow, this looks exactly like I was envisioning it when I sat and I read the book. Now, my husband went into the movie having not read the book. I told him kind of a brief overview, but even after I told him about how she was going to get out of the handcuffs, he still, like, I had to look away. I couldn't watch it in the movie. The sounds were bad enough. What is it with Stephen King movies? I'm thinking about Misery now. Like, even if you look away from some of those pivotal moments, it's like, why is the noise even worse than the action itself? That was the case here. And my husband, who works in the medical field, was even like sitting there wide-eyed, like, ugh. And I don't know. I couldn't look at it because I thought, I will faint. I will pass out if I watch this. So I was just sitting on the couch, like, screaming. And even he was over there cringing. So I was not strong enough to do it. But you know what? If you are, then props to you. I was trying to imagine someone going into that movie blind and then not realizing like what was going to happen. Would you guess that she would have to cut her own hand to free herself from handcuffs? I mean, maybe. It makes me think of like in Saw 2, where the girl puts her hands in the traps and they get stuck. It was very much like that, which I also screamed when I saw that, far too young. But I want to know like what people's reactions were who actually sat through it and watched the whole thing, because I couldn't, and I knew what was going to happen. I was so freaked out by it. And I think that's the mark of like, they did it really, really well. If like I'm sitting there screaming and my strong-willed husband who has like a really strong constitution and can't like get shaken by much is like literally wide-eyed on the couch like, oh God, next to me. So if you've seen it, what was your reaction? Let me know down below. I thought it was one of my favorite King adaptation movies, which doesn't surprise me because Mike Flanagan also did Dr. Sleep, and I thought that was amazing as well. He's doing another King adaptation of The Life of Chuck, which is a short story in the collection If It Bleeds, and I cannot wait to see that one. That one's not going to be a horror. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by that. But as I was saying, this is one of the better King adaptations I've seen, and I hope King likes it. I think he probably does. I know that he and Mike Flanagan have that good working relationship, but I know King is a little particular. He famously doesn't like some of the adaptations of his work, like The Shining, which I do have to say I love the movie. I can separate the two in my mind, though. The movie and the book are two different entities to me. But this was a really great adaptation of a King story. And another quick little personal anecdote to kind of close us out here. So over my holiday break time, my cousin came down to visit, and she and my husband and I went and did an escape room. We're kind of constantly searching for like the most escape room. Like, how close can we get to like dying without actually dying? I don't know. It's like a whole thing. Because I did an extreme escape room a couple months back and it was amazing and we got like grabbed and everything. But we found another one that was advertised as you started handcuffed. And I was like, it can't be that bad. But then we get there and we're actually chained and handcuffed, bound by the wrists with actual handcuffs. And they gave us a warning beforehand. They were like, these are real. Do not tighten them. We've had to call the fire department to free people that thought they were going to tighten them. And don't dislocate your thumb by trying to like squeeze it out of the hole. And then they handcuff us to another object in the room. And I'm sitting there like, I'm like, ow, these are heavy and they hurt. And the whole time I'm like, oh God, Gerald's game. And I even told I said to my cousin and my husband, I was like, no one pull a Gerald's game. I don't know if either of them knew what I was talking about at the time because it was before my husband watched the movie, but I was just so struck by it. I was like, I don't like this. So imagining being handcuffed to a bed for several days, like arms splayed open like that, that was awful. That was god awful. I would really recommend both the book and the movie adaptation of Gerald's Game. But as I mentioned at the beginning, please do your research before going into it. Again, it is some really nasty, really touchy subject matter, and it is definitely not for everyone. As I said, I was looking online on Reddit threads, and this is one that a lot of people really couldn't get into, or it was kind of one that they knew that they didn't want to engage with because of the subject matter. I really did enjoy it. Like I said, right now it's probably in my top 5 Kings, but taste is very subjective. But I'm really happy that I read it. I'm really happy that I saw it. I had a good chunk of time between reading it and watching the movie. I only just watched the movie within the last week. That's why it's kind of fresh in my mind. But I had read the book like 2 months ago. So I had some time to kind of digest the subject matter in it before I was ready to sit down and watch the movies. So both of them are easily accessible. I'm sure that you can find it at the library, your local library, like I did, and the movie is available on Netflix as well. That's going to do it for me here today, but I'm still going to be reading constantly, digesting a lot of horror material. This felt really good today. I'm glad that I was back sitting down talking about a book. I know there's been so many that I've posted that I've read that I really want to talk about, but sometimes I need to let those thoughts kind of simmer. I'm the type of person that just kind of like blah about things sometimes if I don't like take a moment and make some notes and everything. I've been kind of consulting my notes today to make sure I hit all of the points that I wanted to talk about. I'll try not to stay away so long. Again, I have a lot of things that I do want to talk about and cover on this channel, and I really do have a lot of books that I really would highly recommend that I want to do some deep dives into. So hopefully this is the year that I really just like get into all of that, and maybe this is the year that I do my King deep dive on the Dark Tower. Maybe, we'll see. You can find me on Instagram at HHNCarson. I post about what I'm reading and what I'm doing, and I hope to be back here before long to talk about something else with you guys. See you then.